Are you an undergraduate or postgraduate student? Do you work as an M&E consultant or you are a research practitioner? Do you find research methods such an abstract unit in the course of your study or in the course of your work? And this is because you cannot relate the research theory you learn or you learned in class with practice. Then this channel is for you. I, Dr. Lydia Wabogo, welcomes you to this channel, which is a class on research methods. In this class, we discuss everything social science research, from understanding the research discipline, research philosophy, elements of scientific research, and the methodologies of conducting research. Welcome to this channel as we explore this discipline called research. Welcome to our lesson today, where we shall introduce methods of data collection. In our previous lesson, we have discussed the sampling procedure or the sampling process. We have discussed the 6 main steps that a researcher follows when they are sampling. We have also said that these steps are more applicable when you are conducting quantitative research. This lesson has brought to an end the topic on sampling, which we began in lesson 28, and we have taken it all the way to lesson 37. So today's lesson, we are going to start on data collection methods. Our first lesson will focus on types and sources of data and factors that you consider when selecting a method of data collection. Before we move into the lesson, let us familiarize ourselves with the learning outcomes. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to 1. Define data, 2. Identify the 2 types of data, 3. Describe the 3 sources of data, and 4. Explain the factors that you consider when determining the choice of methods of data collection. Why do we need data collection in research? Data collection is one of the most important part of research because without it, you cannot answer the research questions, you cannot test hypotheses, and if you cannot do those 2 things, then it means that you cannot make conclusions, neither can you make recommendations out of the study that you are engaged in. Therefore, the final result, be it conclusion, be it recommendations, be it suggestions for further research, are dependent on the data you have collected. When thinking about the data collection process, 3 factors are very key. The first one is to ask yourself, what kind of data will I collect? Is it numerical or is it narrative? That means, will it be in form of numbers or will it be a description of objects or events? The second point that you need to put into consideration is the method or methods that you will use in data collection. We mainly have 4 methods, and these are administration of a questionnaire, observation, interview, and document analysis. And lastly, what you need to put into consideration is the scoring of the data that will enable you to conduct analysis. Remember, the type of data that you collect will determine the method of data analysis. So now we move to define what is data, and it would also be important to define what is an instrument. Data can be defined as the quantitative or qualitative information of a variable that is obtained from the subjects of the research. In lesson 4 and lesson 5, we discussed variables. and we said that variables are measurable characteristics that vary across objects or events or subjects. And therefore, when you collect information about these variables, this is what we refer to as data. Therefore, data can be in images, it can be in numbers, it can be in words, it can be in figures, can be in facts, ideas, etc., etc. The device that we use to collect data in research is called a tool or an instrument. So do not confuse tools of data collection and methods of data collection. We have said that a tool is the device that a researcher uses to collect data. So that is what we call a tool or tools of data collection. Whereas methods are techniques. They are techniques of data collection. So when we talk about interview is a method, but interview schedule or interview guide is a tool. Now, the whole process of collecting data that involves not only the selection or design of the instruments, but also the conditions under which the instruments will be administered is referred to as instrumentation. So what we are saying is that instrumentation goes beyond the designing of the instruments, but it also takes care or asks the question, how will these instruments be administered? So having looked at the definition of data, the definition of an instrument, and instrumentation, then we move at the types of data. From our definition, we have said that data can either be quantitative or qualitative. So this figure summarizes for us the types of data, though we are going to discuss them in details. So we have the two major types, which is quantitative and qualitative, and then quantitative is again categorized into two. We have discrete quantitative data and continuous quantitative data, whereas qualitative, which is non-numerical, is also categorized as categorical. So what is quantitative data? Quantitative data are numerical in nature, and they can therefore be mathematically computed. So note that we are not saying that quantitative data is collected from a quantitative research. Do not confuse quantitative research or qualitative research and types of data. So quantitative data is numerical. That means it is quantifiable. It can be computed mathematically. We have two types of quantitative data. We have data that can only be in whole numbers and cannot be subdivided into decimals, and that we call it discrete data. And we have continuous data, which is data that can take any value within a continuum. Now let us look at an example. If you are measuring the number of people or number of animals, they can only take a whole number. So you cannot talk about 10.5 of a person or persons. Neither can you talk about 50.7 animals. They can only be whole numbers, and those are called discrete quantitative data. But if you are to take your height, your weight, the distance, you can subdivide it into decimals. You can talk about the distance from point X to point Y is 16.576 kilometers. So data that can take any value within a continuum is called continuous quantitative data. This continuous data is measured at interval and ratio scale, which we discussed in lesson 5. Now let us look at qualitative data. So qualitative data is non-numerical in nature. It is thus categorical. This data is usually textual or descriptive. For instance, if you asked someone, have you attended a training, and the response that you require is a yes or no, that is a qualitative question. When you ask them to state their gender, their marital status, their level of satisfaction, all those will be qualitative in nature. Why? Because qualitative data consists of detailed description of situations, events, people, interactions, and observed behaviors. Common examples of such data are interview transcripts, documents from reports or minutes or emails, field notes, video or audio recordings, images such as photographs. Categorical data, which we have said is qualitative and non-numerical in nature, is measured at nominal and ordinal scale of measurement. We said that nominal is used to name, whereas ordinal is used to order, and the differences between the ranks is not equal. This we discussed in lesson 5. When we are discussing methods of data collection, we cannot avoid to mention the term measurement. Why? Because remember, in research, we collect data regarding variables. We said variables are measurable characteristics. So what is measurement? Measurement refers to the process of assigning scores or numbers, meanings, and descriptions to individuals or objects, so that those scores, meanings, and descriptions represent the characteristic of interest. Please note from the definition that measurement does not end at only assigning scores or numbers. Even assigning meanings and assigning descriptions is also measurement. You can measure phenomena in many different ways, but you must be sure that how you choose to measure gives you information and data that lets you answer your research question. At the very basic, measurement is about defining terms operationally, which we discussed in lesson 8, and identifying the scale of measurement, which we discussed in lesson 5. Why have we mentioned this? So that you do not associate measurement or equate measurement to a tool. Measurement does not mean data collection. Neither does it mean a tool of data collection, but data collection is a way of measuring. So we have various methods that we can use to measure. For instance, defining terms operationally, scales of measurement, and also collecting data. So it means that the term measurement encompasses many other issues or many other things that you can do regarding a variable. Someone may be asking, what are these scales of measurement? We discussed scales of measurement in lesson 5, and we said that scales of measurement allow us to categorize data or quantify data. Now this, you can see, is very much related to the types of data that we have talked about. We have said we have quantitative that allows us to quantify data, and qualitative, which is non-numerical or it is categorical. We have 4 measurement scales, which is nominal for naming, ordinal for ordering, interval that has no absolute 0, and ratio which has an absolute 0. I would encourage you to go back to lesson 5 and remind yourself on the scales of measurement. Our next outcome is to discuss the sources of data. We mainly have 3 broad sources, and the 3 are: primary sources of data are works that are created at the time of an event or by a person who directly experienced an event. In other words, primary sources are original data that is collected from the original source firsthand. For instance, original handwritten manuscripts, government documents, public records, photographs, etc., etc. The second source is secondary sources. Secondary sources are accounts of events which were created well after the event has occurred. Secondary sources are based on primary sources, and they are used to analyze, evaluate, interpret, or criticize primary sources. For instance, textbooks, biographies, analysis of articles, etc., etc. The third one is tertiary. Tertiary sources are sources that compile or digest other sources. A source is considered tertiary when their chief purpose is to list, summarize, or simply repackage ideas or other information. Common tertiary sources include dictionaries, encyclopedias, directories, guidebooks, manuals, Wikipedia, and similar user-contributed online encyclopedias and reference materials, as well as various digests. It is important to note that the distinction between a primary and a secondary source is not always so clear. It depends on how and why it is being used. Therefore, a secondary source may also be a primary source based on how and why it is being used. One cannot determine if a source is primary or secondary just by its source. It is more on how a source is used, that is the content, rather than its type, which determines to which category it belongs. Please note that when using secondary data, the following requirements must be satisfied. It should be available, relevant, accurate, and sufficient to answer the research question. It is also important to note the following: that the instruments you have collected will give you data that is both valid and reliable. That we discussed from lesson 21 to 27. Number 2, ensure that you pilot test your instrument before administration to the main sample. We shall be discussing piloting in the coming lessons. And finally, do not collect data without authorization for that research. Authorization involves ethics approval and authorization from those in position who control access to people whom you'd want to respond to your instrument. Finally, we look at the factors to consider when determining methods of data collection. Earlier in this lesson, we have said that a method is also a technique, and it can be defined as an established and systematic way of carrying out a particular task. In our case, the particular case is data collection. Researchers have access to 4 main methods of data collection. These are questionnaires, observation, interviews, and document analysis. We have also said that it would be key not to confuse between a method and a tool or an instrument. So a method is the technique, whereas a tool or instrument is the device. So with that, we need to put into consideration the following factors. Number one, the type of data to be collected, be it numerical or narrative, that is quantitative or qualitative. Number two, consider the source. Will you use primary or will you use secondary or a combination of both? Will you collect data from individuals or from groups? And that takes you to the unit of analysis that we will be discussing in our next topic. And finally, audience of the research findings. There are people who prefer numerical data, while others are more comfortable with narrative data. With that, we have come to the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we have introduced methods of data collection by explaining the meaning of data, types of data, sources of data, and factors to consider when determining methods of data collection. We have also said that researchers use 4 main methods of data collection. These are administration of questionnaires, observation, interviews, and document analysis. In our next lesson, we shall start our discussion on the first method, which is administration of questionnaires. Thank you for your time in this lesson. Feel free to ask any question regarding this lesson on the comment section. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel and also to like and share this video with your friends. See you in our next lesson as we discuss administration of questionnaires as a method of data collection.